7 to 20, and I was a bit stuck on some of these because I could have had some of these in the top 10, but what I wanted to do was trying to come up with some variation. However, I also wanted to show some of the new contemporary stuff, what I like as well. And because I think a lot of the stuff from before 2000s, before 90s, a lot of albums before the 80s, they generally weren't well-written albums. A lot of 60s albums had a lot of singles on them, were very good, but not great albums. 70s, there was some good in the early 70s, but the mid and late 70s wasn't always as great. Again, more influential of singles doing well. But anyway, for this year, 1987, I've already mentioned Sign of the Times as number 7, my best album, but this could have actually replaced that. But I wanted to give Prince his credit because I think for a songwriter. But however, this album I think is very influential to me as an artist, as when I did songwriting, but also as a person. Is this album, Michael Jackson's Bad. Michael Jackson's Bad was released in 1987. I was born in 1981, so 7 years old when this album came out. I was too young for Thriller, but I loved Thriller and I obviously grew up with it, loved the music on the radio. But Bad was the album where, as a child, I picked up a lot of interesting ideas of songwriting, learning dance, learning different ideas. So, Michael Jackson's Bad, huge follow-up to beat Thriller. Obviously was never going to. It just the timing was different and so forth. However, with Bad, though it wasn't an easy task, I think Michael Jackson did an amazing effort with this album. And at least 6 of the songs, this was actually the first ever album to have 5 songs which actually got to number 1 in the US chart. So Michael Jackson actually broke history with this album. Did it make as much money selling as Thriller? No, but it made 25 million selling album copies, nearly 30. So it wasn't a bad album at all. Great tour. It was the first time I actually saw a live concert to see Michael Jackson at Wembley with On My Uncle's Shoulders. So Bad as an album has a load of interesting ideas. Now, some musicians call this album a production album because it's all about production and things like that, and they claim the songs aren't great. Total rubbish, because if you look at the songs from this album, if you actually mention Michael Jackson songs, excluding Thriller, most people's favourite songs are off this album, off Bad. So I'm going to go through some of these tracks. So the title track, Bad. Idea of this track was supposed to be a duet between Prince and Michael Jackson. This is an idea by Quincy Jones. I don't think it was ever going to work as a duet. I think it was Michael's song, the idea of coming up with a harder edge sound than Thriller, which was very much bubblegum pop in some respects. Bad as a track was the idea of using minimalistic ideas but also representing Michael Jackson, because so many people had felt he had gone too pop and away from his black music side. So with Bad, you've got some of these greatest. This is actually my original ever copy of vinyl. I've actually got 6 copies of this album because I used to play them to death as a child. But one of the things about this album is you learn about a lot more minimalist. So there's less horn arrangements, but in Bad there is. But Michael wrote more of the songs on this album. So Bad is a track about the idea of who he is, where he's coming to represent. And I think with the music video as well, the impact was huge. So Bad was at that time probably this idea of these very percussive ideas. The dance movements within the video were very inspirational, and I think also the look of when Michael Jackson came out with this kind of half bondish look. I mean, you would never thought that would have taken on, but the styles which people now do in the fashion industry are probably very influenced by that look. So Michael was very forward thinking in that way, and so Bad, being the title track, really starts off, with a bang. Then you go The Way You Make Me Feel, which is basically on a 12/8 rhythm. So it's also, if you listen to the rhythm, it sounds very much like he'd listen to Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fears, like chugga 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 chugga. You can hear that chugging along sound. The Way You Make Me Feel also got some interesting ideas when you read the book by Bruce Swedien, that he actually recorded it in a shower room, so that's where you get that, that clicking and that sort of the reverberance, and his voice has got that very much like he's singing it, very personal, but it's got this kind of like he's singing it in the street, so very much gives it this edge. But Way You Make Me Feel, again, has these great ideas. And I think from Bad and The Way You Make Me Feel, from Thriller, it just is that nice little transition going that you can hear it's new, but it sounds like it could have been a continuation of the Thriller album. So this is where Michael Jackson was very clever, how he, 5 years gap between Thriller and Bad, he still could make sure the audience were gripped enough. The third track is Speed Demon, which was a track Michael wrote because he was supposed to be such a bad driver and he got a speeding ticket, so he decided to write this about the idea of what it was like speeding and what driving was. Got some very interesting ideas. So actually, if you listen to the bass rhythm, it's got this sounding of the motorbike. It's actually the sound of when you start a motorbike, and the bass line in the chorus is this is the revving of a motorbike. So there's all these little ideas of sounds using the Synclavier effects. Which is great programming. They talk about Synclavier programming in Studios in the Room with Maninthemirror, and he talks about this idea and all the people who programmed that. So the synth programming was done by a guy called John Barnes and Michael Budiker, and obviously Greg Filigane still working on the synths. Speed Demon's got very much a funky arrangement, and again, these ideas were very influential. And also, what Speed Demon is also associated with is with the Moonwalker film, where he's actually dressed as the rabbit in the clothes of a biker person. Again, so it gives it this hard edge, because you remember in 1987 people were getting into hair metal in LA, so Michael had been listening to that music, seeing that image, kind of trying to merge the two. So if you actually listen to a lot of the percussive, it's a lot more harder, it's a lot more if you listen to Speed Demon, you can hear this, like the sound is like him where he's hitting construction work stuff. So Michael was always very forward thinking, and Quincy as well. Liberian Girl, track which was obviously showing Michael's African rootage and his ideas of who he belonged and this person he's in love with. Again, sort of very much a ballad, but done like Human Nature or Baby Be Mine, but done in this kind of unusual feel. Most of this stuff as well, Liberian Girl and some of the ideas of Way You Make Me Feel, was also done mainly at Havenhurst by his production team, which was John Barnes and there was a guy called Matt Foger and another guy called Brad Buxer, who would then work later on, and Bill Bottrell. So Michael had a bit of an issue with the Bad album, because you had this production team who worked at his house, and then you got Quincy's people, and he was trying to kind of balance in between the two and getting it right. But obviously Quincy wants the best sound, so I think they always come up with what Michael had come up with, the best demo, and then obviously improved on it. Just Good Friends, which I think is one of the weak tracks on Bad, written by the guy Terry Britton, who's also written for Cliff Richard of all things. He wrote the song Devil Woman, and he also wrote a song called Heaven Help for Lenny Kravitz on another album, which is on Are You Gonna Go My Way. So Terry Britton and Graham Lyle have done it. Graham Lyle, I think, also was in another group, maybe 10cc or something like that. I think obviously he wanted Stevie Wonder on this track, because Stevie Wonder was someone Michael was very influenced, learned a lot of production techniques from, but I don't think it's his strongest song. But it's okay. It's a good little song for the 80s, but it's very dated, whereas I think the other stuff is not. Another Part of Me, one of my favourite songs of Michael's, was originally featured in the Captain EO film in Walt Disney World, and Michael didn't actually want this on the album. Accordingly, the story is that Quincy preferred Another Part of Me, and he was trying to back Frank DeLeo, because Michael had Streetwalker, which he preferred, which is a demo you hear on the special edition of Bad. However, Another Part of Me, if you actually listen to it, was actually then became one of the soundtracks of the Bad tour, and I think also is probably Michael Jackson's spiritual side. Again, probably not the most interesting pop song, but it's actually, there's a lot of rhythms ideas, and if you actually listen to it, it's got this kind of feel of James Brown, which I think was very influential to Michael. So yeah, very good song, great rhythms, and Michael's voice on point as usual. The anthemic song, which is the next song, was Man in the Mirror. Now, Man in the Mirror was written by Sydea Garrett and Glenn Ballard. Glenn Ballard actually went on to write for Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill album. But Sydea Garrett had been in the music industry for many years. She actually sang on Don't Look Any Further with Dennis Edwards, and she also was a part of Quest Productions, Quincy Jones's record label. However, Sydea one of the things with Sadea, you can actually hear Michael, is that you can hear Sadea every time singing in certain parts of the song, because actually what he'd done, he'd listened to Sadea sing it in her style and tried to copy it. So you got this idea. But it was much Michael Jackson's first anthemic song after We Are the World, which obviously was all the rest of them, but this was his own song. Probably is one of the key songs a lot of people like from Michael Jackson. It's not my favourite, I'll be honest with you, because I find some of the anthemic songs are good, but you have to be in that certain mood, whereas to me, I think with Michael Jackson, I like to listen to the upbeat music, for me, my personal opinion. However, great track, features the Andrea Crouch and the Winans on this, so really some great choir work on this, and very minimal, but really effective. I Just Can't Stop Loving You was Michael Jackson's ballad. It was actually the first song released in the album, Like the Girl Is Mine, and a lot of people thought, oh really, is this it? But it works in this, and actually originally he wanted to do this duet with Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston rejected, then he asked Barbra Streisand, Barbra Streisand said, I'm too old, don't want to do it. I can understand why he would have got Barbra Streisand, because Barbra Streisand really is a great vocalist, and but yeah, she didn't like the idea of the concept. So in the end, Sadea Garrett, because she'd done Man-Mirror, was working in the field, Michael worked with her, and it works because Sadea Garrett has also had the previous experience of doing a duet, but this is very different. So Michael with this, very much again, definitely written by Michael. You've got that sensitivity, that idea, very different. Kind of, I imagine he wrote it at a very similar time to Liberian Girl, and yeah, very good song. And also there's versions in Spanish, and I think it's Italian, and I think French as well. So Michael actually learnt them translations as well. Ruben Blades wrote the Spanish one, which actually was very popular. You have to try and get hold of a copy of it. It's very good. So I Just Can't Stop Loving You, really good song. Then we get into Dirtydiana, which is the rock song, which is like the Beat It of Thriller. So Dirtydiana, written by Michael, has Steve Stevens as a guitar solo, and that's someone who worked on Billy Idol's work. Also, you've got this idea, I think it's Bill Bottrell, I think, was the guy who probably co-wrote this. Bill Bottrell features more in the Dangerous album, but I think Dirtydiana, I think he might have been around the studios talking to him like that. There is rumours Dirtydiana is about Diana Ross. I don't believe it is, but there is rumours of that. But I think it's more about the groupies, which kind of is the mixture of the idea of the rock sound of, at the time, because Guns N' Roses and all the other sound of Whitesnake and Bon Jovi was popular. So Michael Jackson coming up with Dirtydiana just shows that he could do rock just as good as anybody. Prince obviously did a lot of rock music because he's a guitarist, but Michael was never seen as that, but he could always just pull up that song when he wanted to have rock. He does it twice on Dangerous, Black on White, and obviously Give In To Me. But with this, I think this is the key. This was actually a massive song at the time. It was one of the 5 number ones on the album, from this album. And then probably the last album, because remember this is the vinyl version, is Smooth Criminal. So Smooth Criminal, probably one of the most overproduced tracks, and there was supposed to be rumours Quincy hated it because he worked on it so much. However, if you listen to the technology and actually listen to the multi-tracks, a guy called Chris Lipe on YouTube shows this, and the multi-track layers on this, the idea of the synth programming, all the different ideas, sounds he was using. You want to understand about Michael Jackson's vocal ability, is the idea of all these counteractions of different vocals and how he could mimic different things, different sounds, double up. And actually I think if you ever want to understand where Michael Jackson would have got influenced by rhythm, you listen to Stevie Wonder, but his vocal ability is Marvin Gaye, definitely. So yeah, Smooth Criminal being the last track on the vinyl, and then obviously if you were lucky, and I've got a CD version of there, you would also get Leave Me Alone, which was another track which features like a bass funk idea about his idea of going against the press, but doing it in the idea of a metaphor of a love song. Very famous in the Moonwalker album because it had the idea of him being the theme park and the theme of attraction. Smooth Criminal obviously is probably, before Scream, was his most expensive video because he was dressed in the fedora, which was his tribute to Girl Hunt in The Bandwagon, a Fred Astaire film. And the idea of that, of Smooth Criminal, was probably Michael Jackson's biggest work, and I think personally his best music video from the Bad era. Speed Demon being great, but actually the idea of it, the story, the dance choreography, the whole mixture of it, and everybody obviously as a child of my age all wanted to do that lean where they move forward. So Smooth Criminal had a huge influence. So when we're looking at this, number 11, Michael Jackson. I could have put this in the top 10 because it was very influential, but I did want to show others' albums. But to me, this is his second best album, and I know some people will say Off the Wall. I get it why people like Off the Wall, but for me, Off the Wall, I think there's some good tracks on Off the Wall, but as a whole album, I don't enjoy it that much. I think it's very disco based. Whereas this, I think you can get different feels. Like, for example, the ballads I think are better than on Off the Wall. Thriller's ballads I think are better than this. You see, so I think you have to temper it right. And I just feel Bad is his second best album. And I think actually in the 80s, I personally think in the late 80s it's probably one of the last best albums of the 80s. But Sign of the Times, for me with Prince, I felt is very influential in just ideas of songwriting and song production. Another album I think at that time as well would have been influential would have been Faith by George Michael. And then obviously in 1989 was Like a Prayer by Madonna. So anyway, that's my review on Bad, Michael Jackson. And on to number 12, and that's going to be something from the new millennium. And with obviously what I've explained next, have a guess what you think it is.